Good morning. I am Saini at the University of Canberra. I'm speaking with Michelle Grattan in our weekly interviews about the politics in Australia. Good morning, Michelle.
Hi, Deep.
Michelle, we left last week talking about the National Energy Guarantee. The coalition met after that, and the Prime Minister secured the party room support for his position on National Energy Guarantee. But he still doesn't have the support of states and territories. That's not clear where they're going to go, and particularly the worrisome states for him are the ones held by the Labor. Where do you think this is going to go? What do you predict is going to happen in the weeks to come?
Well, the government had hoped for a clean decision a week ago from the states that they would sign up in principle to the scheme, but of course politics intervened and the Labor states have not given their consent. The interest really is on Victoria because it's got an election later this year and it's under a lot of pressure from the Greens. The state Labor government there is really up against it in this election. So I think that they might procrastinate from now on, probably until their caretaker period in October, and that's very complicating for the federal government. Now,
Prime Minister Turnbull's problems are not just simply external, they are also internal, which which could be actually a bigger issue than the external problems. And that is his own MPs are threatening to cross the floor. As many as 10 or 12 MPs could end up crossing the floor. Now, where does that leave his leadership? If
there was a group that big, his leadership, I think, would be under a considerable pressure. But at the moment, of course, what he's trying to do is talk these people round. Now, they're really driven by various motives. Tony Abbott, you won't be surprised to know, is right in the middle of this insurgency. But it goes well beyond people who really want revenge against Malcolm Turnbull. It also takes in a number of nationals. There's feeling about this particularly in the Queensland grassroots of the Liberal and National Party, and I think that we will see over the next few days a very strong attempt by Malcolm Turnbull to placate the various people who are worried about the National Energy Guarantee. What they're centrally worried about is that there are not enough assurances that price will come down, that power prices will be significantly lower. The other strand of this is that they're really agitated about legislating for the emissions reduction target, and this goes to the whole climate wars issue. What is coming from the Prime Minister's office at the moment is the message that the Prime Minister is willing, when it comes to the energy companies, the retail companies, to use the big stick to get power prices down. He doesn't really have the option of using the big stick on his colleagues, so he's really sending the message that there will be as much intervention in the market as seems necessary.
Well, thank you for that, and I'm sure that we'll still be talking about this issue in another week or two or more.
Absolutely, if not month or two.
Let's switch to another issue, which is also quite a hot issue. That is the maiden speech by the Senator Fraser Anning earlier this week in the Parliament, where he used very inflammatory language to speak about immigrants and immigration, and essentially has reignited some of the debate about immigration and race. Are we looking at this debate flaring up again as a divisive issue in the country?
I think that there are a couple of things out of that speech. Of course, he used the term final solution when he was proposing that there be a plebiscite on the number of immigrants that we take. And he also called for a ban on Muslim immigration. So those were the most inflammatory things in a generally very inflammatory speech. That got a united response from the Parliament. Bipartisan motion was passed reaffirming Australia's non-discriminatory policy. So out of a very hate-filled speech, frankly, we did get a ray of unity and positive language and sentiments. So that was on the plus side. But on the negative side, what we are seeing more generally is the whole immigration debate with race overtones being an increasingly divisive one, I think, in the community. And this is a real worry. It's being played up not only by some minor parties like Pauline Hanson's One Nation, although it should be said that Pauline Hanson actually denounced the Fraser Anning speech. Fraser Anning came to Parliament as a One Nation candidate, but immediately parted ways with the party. But in general, of course, One Nation does talk up the immigration debate. So do a number of very outspoken right-wing commentators. And this is an extremely difficult issue for the parties to manage, the major parties, also I think for the community to manage, because it is undoubtedly true that ordinary people, many ordinary people, have concerns about the pressure that a high level of migration puts on the cities, our infrastructure, the need to get more migrants to regional areas, and you really can't do this by compulsory means, or at least not in the longer term, and all sorts of other associated issues. And it is an issue, I think, that is going to be quite tricky to be managed over the next few years.
You mentioned Pauline Hanson. Her position was actually probably the most interesting one in this whole debate. She herself is on record in her own maiden speech having called for a ban on Muslim immigration.
And she still supports that.
And she still supports that, and yet she criticised Mr. Anning. What do you make of that?
She criticised the final solution phrasing. She said this speech was written, she claimed this speech was written by some staffer of Senator Anning's, who had history with One Nation, and she was very strongly criticising that staffer. She also said that she and One Nation weren't believing in white Australia. So she had essentially the message that Senator Anning had gone well beyond her, and she's pretty out there, obviously, on immigration issues. So she wanted to differentiate herself from a man who had been on her own ticket.
Well, in times when one has of necessity to focus on really the negatives in politics, because that's what we see most of the time, it was good to see something positive happening where, you know, this man who made really outrageous statements, he got criticized by all sides of the political spectrum.
Well, it was good, and there were a lot of good moments in that debate, which was in both houses on the unity motion. It was just a great pity that it had to be moved, as it were, out of this very nasty speech.
Just to finish for today, let's spend a moment on what happened in the Senate when a crossbencher senator, Senator David Lynham, introduced a bill to allow the territories to legislate assisted death. And that didn't go through, it fell. And what are the implications for ACT and the Northern Territory from that?
Well, it does mean that they won't be able to go their own way on this issue, a very controversial issue. The bill narrowly failed, but if it had got through, it would have put a lot of pressure on Malcolm Turnbull, who wouldn't have wanted it to go to the lower house to be debated, but it's an issue that a lot of the public would think should be fully debated, and of course it involves this question of territory rights. So on a couple of levels it's very controversial, but off the agenda for the moment as far as the territories are concerned.
Gives Mr. Turnbull an escape, but doesn't settle the issue.
That's absolutely right, and it's an issue where, of course, a lot of Australians think the law should be changed. It has been changed in Victoria.
Well, thank you, Michelle. You have a nice weekend, and we'll talk again next week.
Thank you, Dee.